A new report on the death penalty, which has been released by Amnesty International. It says that governments around the world are using the threat of terrorism to advance executions, leading to an alarming increase in death sentences around the world last year. It shows the number of people sentenced to death in 2014 rose by 28% to the previous year, to 2,466. But the number of people recorded as executed dropped by 22% to 607. This figure excludes China, which keeps numbers of executions secret. On the whole, 22 countries are known to have carried out executions in 2014, with 19,094 people under sentence of death worldwide at the end of last year. Well, for more on this report, I'm joined now by Amnesty International's death penalty expert. That's Chiara Sangiorgio. Chiara, thanks for coming in. The number of death penalties is up, but the number of executions is down, which is surely a positive thing.
Yes, certainly 2014 represented kind of a mix of stories of good news and bad news. As you mentioned, the number of the sentences went up by 28%, and the increase was mostly due to a sharp increase in the number of the sentences handed down in Nigeria and Egypt, where we also recorded mass death sentences being imposed. The number of executions went down by almost 22%, and that was mostly due to a decrease in executions in the Africa region and the Middle East and North Africa. However, we also recorded other positive news stories. The governor of Washington in the United States established a formal moratorium on executions, and Madagascar, the National Assembly on Human Rights Day, actually on 10th of December, decided to adopt a bill to abolish the death penalty. We're waiting for the bill to be signed, but we're hopeful that Madagascar can become the 100th country to have abolished the death penalty for all crimes this year.
You say that states and governments are using the excuse of terrorism to justify the use of the death penalty. Is that the main reason for this rise in the number of death penalties that are being handed out? It's
not the main reason, but it's certainly one of the most concerning trends that we have recorded last year. We've seen that governments in countries that use the death penalty have done so in the name of state security or public safety. We've seen, for instance, China using the death penalty as part of the Strike Hard campaign against unrest in the northwest region of Xinjiang. We've also seen Egypt handing down massive death sentences in the context of the political instability and the unrest following the change in the government of President Morsi. We've also seen the government in Indonesia, for example, announcing that they will take steps and execute, fact that became reality in 2015, to confront a national drug emergency.
But you mentioned China there. You have no accurate figures in China because the Chinese government obviously don't release those figures, but it's thought that China executes more people than the entire rest of the world put together. So aren't these statistics a little bit, without meaning to sound harsh, a little bit useless, because, you know, China executing so many people, yet we don't know how many people are being killed?
Certainly. We have continued to monitor on a daily basis the use of the death penalty in China, and on the basis of our figures we feel confident in saying that the number of executions and the sentences carried out and imposed were actually in the thousands. China remains the country that executes more people than the rest of the world together, and yet the figures, as you said, are classified as a state secret. In 2009 we stopped publishing our own figure because partly because it was being misused, and partly because we continue to challenge the authorities in revealing what the true figure is and letting us know what's the real picture of the use of the death penalty in the country. They have been claiming an overall reduction in the number of executions, but without the figures and without the full information, this claim is impossible to corroborate.
You mentioned Nigeria earlier as being a country where death penalties have increased in the recent years. Just why do you think that's happened in Nigeria?
Nigeria last year did not carry out any executions, which is something that they did in 2013. The fifth prisoner that was at risk of executions in the previous year was actually released in 2014, following some judgments by regional courts. The number of the sentences went up, and that was one of the major concerns that we had last year. That was partly due to mass sentences that was imposed in September and December, again in the context of the conflict against Boko Haram. Part of the sentences were imposed for mutiny because the soldiers refused to go and fight Boko Haram with the weapons that they were given, and they were charged with mutiny. Amnesty International remains concerned about how the death penalty is imposed and is applied in Nigeria. We have several concerns about the fairness of the trials upon which people were sentenced to death, concerns about the legal representation, and we remain concerned that ultimately it is the poor who end up paying the price with the death penalty.
The United States, the land of the free, is obviously many states